Okay. It should be.
That's running.
We'll see.
I always do the layering.
Yeah.
We're streaming everything. As the Soundlings, we try to take on each project as internationally as possible, so it's possible for everybody around the globe to follow this discussion. And as of last time, we actually got the first responses while we were working. So we're trying to incorporate that as well. So you can post questions or remarks, and we try to incorporate them into the discussion. If it works.
We'll see.
Yeah, we get commercials.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
It's automatic.
It's a free resource thing.
With advertising.
It says it's sort of working, I guess. Yeah, it's working.
All right, cool.
It's there.
So, my name is Thijs. I'm a student at the HKU. I'm going to start doing an MA there next year in sound art. I'm setting up these think tank sessions in collaboration with Pinar as part of the Soundlings collective. That's basically me.
Hey, I'm Shirin and I'm from Turkey. And I did an arts management master's at the HKU. That was 4 years ago, and I've been working in the cultural sector since then. I haven't specifically worked in sound design, but I'm interested in music and culture and art and audiences on the other end of things. I'm now doing a cultural economics master. I plan to go for research in the future. The future is, for now, not clear. Here I am.
Okay. I'm Martijn. I live here, Netherlands. I studied at the HKU. Graduated a couple of years ago as a composer of electronic music, which is as far from the truth as you could get. I'm a video programmer now by trade. I freelance and I do my own projects, hoping to launch my own games sometime soon. That's it.
I'm Ben, full name Benas. I'm from Lithuania. At the moment now I'm here for third year already studying fine arts. Before I was studying a bachelor in jewelry, which is also like really fine arts, contemporary jewelry. And yeah, what is about sounds? I just started doing something connected to the sounds as I love installations and stuff like that. So
Hi. I'm Alex. I'm from Boston, and it's my second day here. I'm an artist here, resident for 2 weeks, and my background is in interactive music and performing arts technologies, and also education. I have my PhD in music education and do a lot of collaborative work with kids and with training teachers to use digital technologies to make music, and particularly the Scratch visual programming language and interfaces for new musical instruments.
Okay. I'm Wouter. I'm a composer of electronic or electroacoustic music. I studied sonology in The Hague I finished in 2000, so it's actually quite some time ago already. Since then, active in the field of electronic music, both composing and creating electronics for other composers or performing electronic music.
My name is Jonathan. I organize community events here at STEM, and my background is in interaction design for music.
That's it? That's it? Okay. Pinar, I'm part of the Soundlings. I'm a sound designer. Right now working as a sound designer in a game company, but I also do installation art. That was my main focus. And now it's kind of a side project, or what do you call it? And I work a lot with Thijs, so Soundlings sort of became our main project that we do together, and we have some other members. And that's it.
I'm Yaniv. I'm from Israel. I studied 4 years theater, 1 year cinema, 1 year sonology. I deal a lot with theater and music. I build instruments, usually electroacoustic. I work as a technician, and yeah, that's it.
I'm Taku. I'm mostly a musician. Yeah.
Spend my time doing music.
That's it, okay. My name is Gagi. I'm a composer. I'm at the same school as Thijs at the moment, but in the same year. Although I'm studying composition and electronic music, and therein I focus on working together with musicians, but also with choreographers, filmmakers, and combining electronic music and acoustic music. So that's in a nutshell what I do. And I also work with Thijs on a project right now. That's it.
Okay. Yeah, so today we're discussing ways of communicating live electronics and interactive installations with an audience. So I would like to kick off. Maybe some few people have been thinking about this subject and have maybe examples of projects where the communication with an audience was really successful or really failed or something. So would anybody like to begin?
Well, I suggested this topic when we started, so maybe I can kick off by giving an example of an installation I saw at the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam, and it was an interactive installation, not per se with sound, but basically it was a basket of plastic with, I think, stickstoff,
Nitrogen?
Nitrogen, yeah, so it looked steamy, and there were some projection beams into it, so you could see this moving, and at some point it said with the text blow. So I started blowing, and then at that moment everything started to change and it looked very beautiful, but I had to wait for 10 minutes for that to appear. So my girlfriend walked past it and said, "No, it's not so special." But when I stood there and I saw blow and I blew, it became something very special. But at the same time I thought it's such a shame when so many people walk by and don't see this special thing. So maybe we can talk about ways of interacting with the audience in maybe this particular example. Because I think it can be more successful in the communication part, but I don't think it's a very nice thing to have the text with blow all the time there. So it's a hard thing, I think, with most interactive in audio installations or installations. Yeah, it's an important thing, I think. So I don't know what kind of experiences do you have, or?
Well, I blew without reading this note, actually.
Oh, you saw it also? Oh, okay. Well, you're more adventurous than I am, probably.
I can see an immediate analogy to the world of games, where you have, at least in older days, you had arcade machines, and they had a similar problem. They were just standing there, and people were walking by. How do you get them to play? So they have this mode called the attract mode, in which nobody's playing, nobody's interacting with it, but it does something that signals to everybody around that it's there and invites them to play with it. And the text blow that you have there, that is kind of a really poor way of doing the attract mode.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is.
So framed in that sense, it should make a little bit more noise, or in the context of an installation, does the installation have an idle state? It probably does. It's not just off. It's running some program. But what is that, and how does that get people involved? Apparently there was an afterthought in this one, but you need to design for it.
Yeah. Well, the pictures were moving. I don't. You saw it also. Were some fishes or
So
zoomed in ocean-like documentary stuff, which looks very nice. But it moved and it changed, but it didn't really.
It was like, come over here.
No, not really, not really, not to me at least.
probably has to do a lot with the size, because the location was quite good. Everybody's passing by.
Yeah, it's
But
true.
nobody pays so much attention just because it's that size.
Yeah, it's the IKEA basket I also used.
Well, mine.
But on the other hand, I sometimes see these installations where they have this sort of little leaflet next to it that explains like that this is an interactive installation. If you do this and this, oh, just wait what might have happened. And that's sort of like, oh yeah, gee, nice. Thanks, but no thanks. Having that explained like that makes me feel like I'm like 4-year-old.
But it sometimes ends up being necessary.
Necessary. I mean, necessary is
well,
I mean, it shouldn't be necessary.
It shouldn't be, but it ends up being necessary. That's kind of a fact right now. I mean, at least what we're dealing with. Actually, right now we're working on an audio installation. No visual dynamic part to it. It's just very static visually. And how do you attract it? Like we have an idle note. We're trying to figure out that what you call attract. Well, we called it idle. That was fun actually. But so we are thinking of in that terms. But there comes a point, even when you have an idle note, depending on the context, you cannot generalize that you will never need that kind of text. Like in our case, it's a lobby. It's like an entrance. People will be talking, drinking, going and passing by. So their focus is somewhere else. It's kind of for an opening event sort of thing, I guess. I'm not even sure actually. That's the one thing. But I know that it will not be there is an installation, I'm going to see it. They won't have that mindset. They will go there to see something else, and on the way we have to grab their attention. So what we have is just in the I don't know, we're still developing, so it's not clear, but to to let it do something, some sort of glimpses of what it can make, but just slightly, sort of a promise, and then lure them in hopefully that visually it will be at least interesting to look at, so they will come close, we hope. And once they get closer, we are thinking of how to interact with them, like how to make it clear to them that when their presence somehow affects the sound of it. And the sound content could have some relation to clarify this interaction. In our case, it's their voice actually. We record them and replay them, so they might get a glimpse of speech and realize, hey, I just said this before. So these are not really controlled. So for them to realize that there is some sort of interaction between them, it's in that context, having the attention so, easy to be distracted or whatever the word, I think we will need that text. I don't like it, but we will need that text in a time frame at least. I couldn't come up personally with a better way of making it sure that at least some of them will know that it is an interactive installation.
This is a sound installation?
Yeah. The one that I was asking for.
Oh, yeah, this one. Okay.
If you're going to have a static description somewhere on a poster on a wall, do it with pictures.
That's the whole thing. Visually, it's not. Yeah.
Or describing the interaction.
Oh, you mean like, oh yeah, that's closer and then like okay, yeah, that's a good one actually. At least more interesting than reading.
Is that you just hate text?
It's really faster as well. So. No, I like text. It's just, yeah.
Shorter is better.
I guess so. People are mostly visual, right? But what I wanted to say was that, like, saying that that you're never ever gonna end up needing that text is really not accepting certain possible bottlenecks you will face. You're just being realistic. It's not always I don't think that it's always possible to leave it, but I would rather leave it there outside and make the work somehow speak for itself, be able to, in whatever context you put it, be able to communicate that it's actually interactive. But
is there any artwork that you see, like in other mediums, that doesn't have a text?
Even in games, you have text to explain controls.
Yeah,
games.
But good designers try to move away from that, though.
But how do they do that?
Yeah, that's the question.
But
Like, how can you?
No, but I mean, like, if you go see a painting,
Yeah.
isn't there a text there?
Not,
Usually the
not
title.
necessarily.
Yeah, but there's
The
a
title
But
and
there's a
maker.
text.
No, but there's a text in the museum, a way to look at
Yeah.
art, right?
Yeah.
So, isn't everything we see based on a text that
But
says blow?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the texts that come before you see the piece. You can read the text if you're interested in something you've seen.
But you're
I
still
think
talking
that's
about the
introduction.
scene part. Like,
The?
for example, you're using the word see. Even that suggests sort of like, you
Yeah,
know,
I
things to
think
look
I
at.
meant,
Yeah, but it's
piece.
yeah, I know, but
Okay.
like seeing is actual fact.
Yeah.
I think it has there's a difference. Like seriously,
Yeah.
work of arts for eye and work of art for ears.
Yeah,
two different things.
But I-
You're also talking about context and framing. I mean,
Mhm.
every successful interactive sound installation that I've ever seen or heard set up a situation, a context for listening. And the situation you're describing is in a distracted environment. I mean, this is not a context that's conducive to listening. And I think also, I mean, like Dr. was saying, you know, the museum sets up a context for seeing.
Yeah.
Most really successful interactive exhibits that I've seen set up a context where
Yeah.
interaction is almost like a natural thing that happens. So I mean, I think it's also very much a situation where you have to think, okay, well, like, how am I presenting my work? Where am I presenting my work? I mean, how do I lead the audience into my work?
Yeah.
And yeah, the sound mix work. I mean, I know you told me a bit about this work, and yeah, it just seems very weird.
Yeah.
This is like the environment that you're putting it in.
Yeah, but it's not archers. That's where they want it.
Right.
So you have to make a work for it. Yeah.
But then, I mean, can you create?
Well, that's
a
the thing.
sound-
We took the challenge. We'll see.
an interactive sound.
We'll see. I hope.
in a
We'll learn
context
from
that's
it.
not a-
Something to put an eye on is that the difference between a sound installation and anything else that's sound is that it's not time-based. This is the big difference. An installation is not time-based. You get in, you have as much time as you want inside. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and
Sometimes they make it somehow like it's kind of performance.
performance slash
Installation.
installation. But then it's a it becomes time-based. It becomes something that you can have something surrounding it in life, in your daily day. So I think that maybe understanding how time works when this sound is in the space is, then this could somehow get the attention. It could somehow, I just think it's interesting to see this difference of time-based versus non-time-based, and the fact that non-time-based is infinite. It
But
doesn't start anywhere and doesn't end anywhere.
But that's not different. Having being time based and having a start and end is two different things. Like you're talking about linear stuff, like really fixed time. Like then it's maybe performance in that sense. Like it has a start and an end. But time based, an installation can be time based, but it doesn't necessarily have to have a start and end. You can be part of it and come out of it, but it's still time based.
Exactly. But the time based is different.
Yeah.
Time based is I mean, well, time-based art is basically, from what I learned, is something that has a beginning and an end. It's theater, film, music is time-based art. It's something
Yeah,
that,
but
that
what I
you
was
see
trying
for
to
a
say,
certain
yeah.
amount of time.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, no, just the thought of where does time get into this situation where people are distracted and it's just in the background, which is something we don't want. I think has to do with how time works in front of an art piece. Because I mean, even a painting can be it's interactive art. I mean, so
Yeah, okay. Everybody says that. I don't agree, but that's me.
Let's not get into the definition.
Yeah, let's not get into the definition. That's why I'm moving out of
I was
it.
kind of thinking about the first example with the blow when something happens. Looking at it from another perspective, isn't it the fact that you took the time to look at it and wait for it, and then something happened, and then you responded by blowing, and then something else happened, not being explained beforehand. wasn't that really conducive to the fact that you really liked what came after it? Because
Yeah, that's true.
you
That's true.
got into a relationship with the piece, and that resulted into you experiencing this. And was it explained beforehand, like, oh yeah, you can blow and something happens? Then you might have been, oh yeah, cool.
And there you go.
Oh yeah, fun, and you walk off,
Yeah,
and you miss that. I mean,
Yeah.
there might be fewer people who experience it, but the experience that you get
It's more intense.
while it's unexplained might be much more special, much more like
Yeah, that's
mysterious in a sense.
Yeah, it's a careful balance
Yeah.
in having to ask a question to somebody that you'll have to get them to answer somehow. And the more difficult or complex the question, the more interesting it is for the person solving it or answering it. But it also, you can drive them away if they can't solve it within their attention span. So I guess, yes, context of where you actually put the piece and display the piece is so very important. You might not be able to put on the same interactive installation in exactly the same way in one place, and then take it to another. So you might actually have to make that scalable somehow.
The intent of that original blow could have been a private message for those who do choose to linger, and it's not necessarily about engaging everyone.
Yeah, exactly. But since it's a private message, it's also the experience you get after that feels like a private performance or a private viewing.
So my question with that was blow in text as words, was that a disruptive experience that, say, had it been a video that came on of somebody blowing, rather than the words BLOW or the letters on there, you know, how would that have impacted that experience?
Well, because all the other screens were very organic, and then all of a sudden you see this word on top of it, it has more extreme effect. It had on me. But I can imagine if you see somebody blowing, it's maybe less, because blow is also a command.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, hey,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I think it's
It's playing with a lot of. I mean, it's, everything. It seems to be very case specific. In your case, it's really is playing. I think to the human nature as well. It's command issuing to do something. It's different than explaining it. It's like it's not explaining it. It's just giving you like okay. For example, your example is it's like instructing the player to just move forward. It's pretty much just as you said, a command. It's completely different than saying like the piece is gonna do this when you do this. It's, yeah, whereas a video or a pictured diagram of explaining the interaction before is more revealing, and it's not so much about. I think I actually, after seeing this, I think this is much more in that context, very smart way of doing it than putting a video or a photo or a text or whatever.
But let me confront you with Mario, which is an example. Of course, that's old school, and you've all played it, presumably, or seen it, or are familiar with it. So this will work. The thing is, if you played any of the, especially the earlier games on the NES, it never tells you what to do. Not a single word of text except for maybe rescue the princess. It puts you there, and you don't even know, if you're completely new to it, you don't even know that you have to walk right all the time and that the end of the level is there. You don't even know that there's an end of a level. You don't even know that it's a level. You can't walk left, so you, how do I move? You just press the buttons and you move. Okay, I can't move left, I move right. That's already two things that you've learned. I can move, I have to move right. Then suddenly you encounter the question mark thing above you, and you can't reach it. So what? I want that. What does it do? What's in the box? So you stand underneath it, and you hit the buttons until something happens, and then you jump, and then whoa, I can jump, and then there's something comes out of the box. And what's that? I'm gonna get it.
That is like that. You know that is like, say it's a tutorial level, sort of slowly opening it up. Like first they don't introduce you with the boss from the start. First you have to move, then you have to jump, so it's like baby steps. But this idea, it takes time. So you have to go through a level that will introduce new elements to you. As I said, it's very basic. This in most interactive art, I dare say, yes, not that I've seen all of it, but like still most of the things that I've seen don't necessarily have that kind of overtime development, like that over time new elements will be introduced to challenge the interactor, the person who's interacting
I guess
with
it depends on the time span that you expect people to take
But
part
that's
in.
the thing. Oftentimes I feel like where does it start? This is actually a question. Like, is it something that we accept now and actually reinforce by making short time span interactions, like to the point of just push button level, like really simple? Or is it like over time you introduce new elements but give the time for them to explore and learn that specific interaction and then introduce another thing because what they have been doing doesn't work anymore, doesn't change anything.
But you have this in a bit, sorry, in this case that it can happen that you are there for 10 minutes, you don't see anything, and there will be one audience member who will be like, okay, this is boring, and move on.
Yeah.
There will be someone who is there for 2 minutes already that blows and sees the whole interaction, and the one person who is curious enough to stay there for 10 minutes and get the hint.
Yeah.
And then you do have some sort of a push for those who are curious and don't really know, but not going back to the beginning, not the text to explain to you what it does. And you kind of have this different rewards. The one who never had the attention span loses out on it. The one who's curious enough already has its reward, and even a better reward if you do it with the hint. And in that sense, it's a sort of a longer long-term experience, but it can also be like completely lost on half of your
but
visitors.
at least it has a possibility to go
you
further.
take the risk as, I guess, the creator to say, okay, well, I create this, I lose half of the people with the short span, but the other will get a better reward.
Or the other way around.
But it's also like the Mario example is very one-on-one. You sit behind your console and you take the steps in order to learn the game. But in a lot of exhibition spaces, while one person is engaging with the artwork, another one walks in, and another one walks in. And they walk in while the first one who's there is basically like mid-game. And for the second person who comes in, it's like, I don't get this because there's stuff already happening.
The process is already in the middle of it.
Yeah, you're like in the middle of the tutorial, somebody walks in and expects like to have the back knowledge of the entire process. And I think that's one point where the Mario example sort of doesn't compute to a lot of
it's tailored to the individual, which is harder to do.
Exactly. If you go to like let's get to performance type events, like where you have live electronics, for instance, it's always so that the entire room is first filled, then the curtain goes open, and the concert starts, and everybody has the same trajectory of being introduced to sounds and being introduced to the flow of the evening. And I think that's a very, very big difference from running installations where you always enter like at some sort of midpoint, and you always are confronted with like, okay, what's going on? Is this starting? Is this stopping? Is it what mode is it in? Does it have multiple modes?
Yeah, enabling multiple entrance points is hard. If you're thinking very linearly, like it should have a start and end or progress experience per individual.
Those are artistic choices, I think.
Yeah, but again, it's case specific. But if you want, how do you do that?
Apart from that question, tailoring the experience for each individual that enters dynamically, I do think it's important that for people who enter and are wandering, that they have an immediate response from the system in some way, so that they can immediately tell what they can do and how the system responds. That doesn't have to be all, that doesn't have to be the end of it, but that gives them a start. I've seen countless installations that just patiently let me wait for the 10 minutes or the 15 minutes without a single acknowledgement of that I'm there, and that hardly inspires dialogue. So I'm not, I don't want it to reach out its hand to me and sort of grab me by the neck or by the ears and just drag me in violently, but something that I can use. And Another thing I was thinking is, what if the system grows bored after a while for not being interacted with? After a while, it'll start reaching out more after a while.
Yeah, we were actually just thinking about it, yes. Shall we say? Yeah, why not?
Yeah, we're building something like that into that system. Where we have like dripping rain sounds normally in the idle state. What we're doing is like we have this increased bar of boredom, like not being interactive with, and so it gets more chaotic until somebody interacts again, and then the idle state is being set back to the original. But it's indeed, there needs to be some sort of progression, I think, in the idle state as well, because otherwise the idle state just becomes sort of like noise, like
Yeah, exactly.
The background and gets lost in the.
And then what you could do is, just riffing on this, once the first interaction is there, the system could go, oh, what a relief. And for example, if you build up noise with raindrops and somebody just walks in and does the basic interaction that you can do with the piece, it just stops for a moment, or it becomes calm in a light breeze or rain, and then another interaction follows and more happens. You can start, and then that's still a single user experience, I guess, but it's better than nothing.
Right. I mean, okay, again, no, I'm always saying this, maybe, but like this, what you suggested probably could have worked, I would say, in a room of its own. But when it's in the middle of the lobby, maybe that won't be so clear. So you can work around it. You can use different senses of and there could be working around it. It's just I feel like that's been my experience. It's pretty challenging and kind of fine line with only sound-based interaction to actually communicate what's the main interaction mode, like what's that thing that they have to do. So when there's not at all a single visual feedback whatsoever.
Well, can we make this very specific? Your piece, are you willing to discuss the internals of it?
Well, we haven't really figured out. That's what we're thinking
building
of as
it,
well.
so
We're just building.
In that case, let's take the inputs of your piece. What are they? And in what
Only
way?
what?
does it-
Only, and they
yeah, but more specific. Voice
Okay.
is just sound, so I guess there's microphones somewhere.
There is a
What do
microphone.
you listen for?
Well, you explain. I should explain.
I'd like to run the buffers that start recording each time there's a text onset. The buffers are each half a second long and are being used in the sound system. When the state is idle, it's just dripping, so there's just little shards of sound dripping out. And then there's a proximity sensor like infrared, and when somebody gets close enough, we want to start a rainstorm, basically. And it's just pouring out all different sorts of words and stuff that it has recorded. I'm doing some music information retrieval to sort of be able to sort the recordings into noisier ones, less noisier ones. I'm trying to work to a system where I can get the more vocal, have the buffers that have more vocal intent to be more apparent in the rain, so that you can actually hear voices fall down. And then after a while, the rain stops again and skips back into the idle state.
But this is like really the technical description
Yeah.
in terms of
So-
user experience
Yeah,
part of it.
are
I have to say there's two rooms. This is the tricky part. The microphone is another room, that's the entrance. You go from there and then the installation. The first thing you see is a cloud hanging up in the air, which is fluffy and whatever, so it's nice to look at. And there are like speakers hanging from it, which we have to do with
So,
but
how will you get people to talk?
Exactly. What if?
Because people in exhibition spaces, they keep their mouth shut.
Well,
no, it's the entrance. They have to talk because they have to buy tickets.
It's right at the entrance. It's right at the place like, hey, is this place we need to be at, blah blah blah. And it's also a place where tickets are being sold, so you have
And
those interactions.
Even if it's not that, I think you missed that part. The whole session is not like a secluded place where they go there in their head. Oh, I'm going to see a piece. It's a lobby actually. They will be just passersby, like, and it's on their way. But the first thing they see is that thing hanging. So it should be able to grab their attention. What the fuck is this thing doing there up on the stairs?
And are the microphones, can you see the microphones?
No, that's the thing. You will not be aware. That was a sort of our conscious choice of it. We didn't want like talk to the microphone sort of thing. We can also do that, but for some reason we sort of avoided that one. So it's kind of a surprise thing and really subtle. Like if you catch one of your words, you might realize it actually.
It's being recorded in those buffers, and when it gets to the last buffer, it just records over the first buffer again. But there's some time that the buffers are there, so it could very well happen that you say some stuff in the lobby and then you go inside, and then you hear your own voice ringing back, which is sort of might be an interesting interaction, but we're not sure if it's going to happen because if they stay in the entrance too long, for instance, then the sound will be. But there's going to be this relation between what's happening in the lobby and what's happening inside, what's happening in the entrance and what's happening inside, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Again, to go back to your question, like how the interaction part, which is tricky. They are not aware of that they are being recorded. That's the fun part for us. But when they see the object, my assumption is that they will find interesting, and your first reaction is to sort of get a bit closer look. So hopefully you get close. So based on that, you have a distance sensor. So from there on, we can try to figure out different behavioral changes to the thing when they get close, so it does something that it wasn't doing before. But then if this was kind of again, as I said, kind of a secluded place, I think it would have been so much more easier to program that experience back more precisely. But in this case, we are basically assuming, and these assumptions varies. Like there could be an occasion where there are a lot of people coming and going closer because they just have to pass through there. It could be another occasion where there aren't many people, which we have to think of the idle mode, or people could be somewhere else drinking their beers or wines and talking, and how the hell is that thing going to get their attention? So it has to start screaming and getting annoyed by the lack of attention that it's getting, etc., etc. So we're trying to think of ways to make it more actually reacting to, not really smart, obviously, but somehow trying to grab them. But the interaction, which is just basically getting close at this point, it's just based on the idea that it should be interesting. It should be just natural curiosity to get close. But it's not something that you can let's say if you had a joystick, you could have played should I jump, should I run, it's nothing like a controller. You don't have a controller. It's very, You see my point. I mean, how do you communicate this if it wasn't for the possible curiosity that I'm assuming people have at some level?
I think the system getting bored is really interesting. Yeah. The fact that the system wants to be played with after it's idle for a long time. And instead of a text, you could use also maybe your voice inside all those voices that in fragments explain maybe go there or I don't know, something like that. But totally inside this, same way that they talk, having introduced inside the thing that could totally maybe solve this.
Yeah, you can
you can see a good one.
Yeah, so you solved our problem in this case. Let's move to the next case. Who's the patient?
And I also think it's better to talk to the people instead of making all this noise, because if an object makes a lot of noise, people maybe tend to walk away from it instead of walking
I mean, you
towards
can go as naive as like
personal.
Of course,
choice.
but I don't know what you described as.
It also comes out do you want to really be literal, come here or whatever, scream or start crying sounds or whatever. I mean, it's really at some point comes down to the content of it, which is the aesthetic choice you want to.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And is it going to fit in your concept, and where do you kill your babies and where not, etc. It's all decision making.
I kill my babies on the altar.
But maybe you might have some experience because you've been doing a lot of sound and interactive sound installations, no?
I've done a few.
So,
maybe since you came in a bit later, maybe quickly say it with your reason is for being here.
Who are
Oh,
you?
not for being late? Okay, that's fine.
No.
we
Let
forgive.
people show
We
up.
forgive.
Well, basically, Thijs asked me very nicely.
That's why.
Now I have done a few interactive pieces. One, probably the biggest piece, like in terms of interactive dance I worked on was with Chris Halton and Michael Schumacher. Michael Schumacher is actually an Amsterdam-based dancer who is pretty good. And basically, the idea for the piece was to create kind of this sort of space which had an identity of its own, and Michael the dancer was sort of this entity trying to control the space. We were sort of trying to find ways of making the border between the body and the space like really unclear. This was inspired by the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this experience you have after dying, where you are in this kind of energetic space. So the way we tried to give this space this sort of presence was with sound, with very many layers of sound, which would all develop in real time. And
Real time based on?
like during the performance, like there was no like presets or instance of pre-recorded audio. And we had placed sensors in the room for light, as well as sensors on Michael's body, 2 accelerometers on his wrists and 1 on his chest. And we were using these sensors like in 2 different ways. One was really direct, so Michael could make movements and directly influence sounds. And it would feed into sort of an evolving system, which was much more indirect, and which would both sort of move the system into different states. It's kind of composed different sort of sonic states the room could be in, which all has a certain emotional character. Based on how the energy evolved, it would go from one to the other. A bit of randomness in there too, but there were a couple of other things we did in processing the data. We were not using any of the accelerometer data direct. We were always using the standard deviation, so the variation in the signal. So it was more about the amount of energy was coming into the system than like tilting my hand like this. So that seemed to be the most interesting thing to do. Another thing we did was some kind of dynamic scaling. In the piece, there were both like sections where Michael would be dancing very elaborately, but at times he would be just folding these little pieces of paper on a table. So like really going from these macro movements to these micro movements. So we made something that's looking over 2 different time windows and calculating the variation of the signal. If this variation was very little, we would sort of make the system much more sensitive. And that's also was a really nice and interesting way of working with that data. I guess the progression during the piece was that in fact at the start of the piece Michael had relatively little direct influence.
Okay.
And like the longer he was in the space, the more like really direct influence he would get.
Oh.
sense it was also a duet between Michael on the stage and me behind the computer. Sort of, especially during this like the final dance of the piece, I would like adjust the sensitivity of his accelerometers, basically based on like when he would have like a still moment, I would change it, and then when he came out of it, he would have more influence again.
Okay.
So that was very interactive in that sense.
Okay.
How clear was
Yeah.
because it seems like lots of complex different layers are happening at the same.
How is this to the audience or the viewer?
I think the audience, I mean, they really, I think they got this feeling that the room was sort of like nervous. It was also really different from night to night. Because, yeah, and some evenings the system was just going through very different states.
Oh, yeah. How were they able to tell that? Like, going back to the text, did you have a description of all these things, or what was it?
But there was text.
I mean, there was like a description of the piece, but I think it was more about the background,
Concept,
the piece.
yeah.
Were there people who visit like multiple shows and see the difference in?
Yeah.
So does that happen?
Yeah, I don't know how many people visited several shows within one city, performance rather as well. Because between performance cities we changed a lot.
Okay.
Did you manage to speak to some members of the audience afterwards? Actually get to hear what they
we
thought?
did some interviews after the first shows. I think they did get some of the what was going on. Some people also like they didn't realize there were sensors involved, which is fine.
Because I think most people don't even know it's possible. So they just think, oh, it's a thing.
That's also
fixed.
Also a little bit a problem because dance, of course, has a very strong tradition of very tight timing of dancers and music and technicians executing the cues at the right time. So in that sense, it's really hard to make it clear that it is an interactive piece.
Were you on stage?
No, I was sitting in the back trying to discern the dancer in 5% light.
I had noticed because I just finished the interactive dance piece that having a different version of the piece each night forces the dancer to not fall into the rut of knowing all the moves, knowing what's going to happen, and that each performance is much more happening at that moment.
I think that's for me really makes sense if there is room within the dance performance for improvisation. If there's no improvisation, it becomes like a reactive piece. Like you can get a reactive sonography, no interaction. And with Michael, I mean, it was great. I mean, he's a great improviser.
I have always wondered, like, I'm not questioning this in the way that I'm not saying that it's not important. I like doing this stuff as well, so it's not out of question. But I always wonder, like, what is the actual addition? What kind of additional thing this interaction, this way of working, brings from an audience perspective? Like, is this interaction is kind of a very internal dialogue, and you're just letting people to watch you having that dialogue, sort of. They are not really being as you are being interacted. And then the question is, for them, it's still a kind of
why do people go to improvised jazz?
Sorry?
Why do people go to improvisation?
Yeah, I know you can always bring it back to that, but
because it allows improvisation. So you have something that happens in the moment, which is always
If the improvisation skill is there on stage, being performed, and I know that, then that's a different quality that I can judge. Much like skill in playing an instrument, I like being up close enough that I can see people guitar really well. If I know that it's improvisation, then I can judge and a different process of thinking happens. So
Exactly.
it does make a difference.
Yeah, but then how do you communicate that thing so they can actually appreciate it? Because like
Exactly, you do need to communicate that.
that's the thing. Otherwise, to them
I think
it's the
not
same.
necessarily. I don't necessarily agree. It's something that happens inside the piece. It's something that happens in the feeling of
But for instance,
performance.
if you have a fixed piece on score, and the player is performing that, and he makes 3 mistakes, I'm like, okay, this is a crap performance.
If you
The
make
guy
3 mistakes, then it's bad.
If you have the same notes being played as an improvisation, and there are only 3 mistakes, I appreciate that.
Yeah, so
Completely
knowing
different.
that it's an improvisation, knowing that it's kind of on the fly thing is important. What I'm trying to say is this: with technology, it's so much more harder for people to appreciate because it's not so natural. Let's just say it's still for quite a lot of people.
And you can see it.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference.
Make mistakes. If you make a mistake, then people know that something's going on. A mistake
But they
tells
say,
you a
oh,
whole lot
technical
about the
problem,
system.
then they think that's
Yeah.
different.
Yes.
That's also, there's this thing.
I don't know.
The audience doesn't necessarily see mistakes. It's something that we as artists and performers are much more aware than the audience. I mean, we know our mistakes. It gets us in really tense when we're on stage, but it's something that we should totally let go because nobody else except us knows that it's a mistake if you can handle it well. I've seen, I wanted to say before, I saw, I think it was last year at Art Today, an amazing dancer that played with 4 projectors with particles, with points. I don't know if anyone saw this.
The Japanese guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy performance. Crazy performance.
It's really good.
He's
He's been
amazing.
to Dere's art multiple times.
Yeah.
Umeda.
He was a street dancer.
Umeda.
Who?
Umeda.
Yeah. It was an amazing performance, and you couldn't know if it's improvised, if there's sensors, if it's interactive or not. And I went to ask him, and there was nothing interactive there, all on the spot, and it was amazing, and it really didn't matter if there was interaction or not. It just happened well. So I think that the interactive part allows improvisation, allows variation each night, allows us to entertain ourselves on stage
So that
each
you
night,
can,
but for the audience, except if he's a groupie and he comes to see every performance, nobody knows.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah.
it's really, I think it's tools that we use in order to make ourselves, to interest ourselves.
Yeah, as for our narcissistic pleasures.
Yeah, but
Not narcissistic pleasure.
But I do feel like,
yeah, it's narcissistic pleasure. It's cool.
however narcissistic it is,
I like it.
if we are really like have to focus and have to look at how the system is responding and respond to it on the spot, that's a entirely different sort of concentration. And I think that concentration does translate to an audience.
Yeah, definitely.
Let
Definitely,
me say, it translates differently than a really well executed score.
Definitely, but it's something in the feeling, it's something that's deeper than if the audience knows that you're improvising or not. It can see your concentration and feel that it's a different kind of concentration than remembering stuff, but creating them.
I totally agree with everything you said. My question is this. So don't worry. Good. But I have this, this is just for educating people that have no idea what, you know everything, right? You're inside it. No, in a piece, you know everything about it. The thing that you need to know. Okay, right? So you're aware of it. But what I'm trying to say is this, you have vast amount of people who have no idea why this could be important. This is about sort of also educating the way of thinking in general in the public. So what I'm trying to say is that, they could also, for them, since the experience is not so different, they don't know, they could say, you don't have to do this, you could also do that, I will be just as happy.
Exactly.
So, but
it's true.
It is true, but this is my opinion, I think you have to make sure that you have to somehow, basically they can cut your money if they're at this argument.
Okay,
I'm gonna go there. So you have to appreciate how have to teach them to appreciate this extra that they don't necessarily actually notice when well executed.
That's a question. It's a question if you have to make them appreciate this.
I would like them to appreciate also.
Because I think this is a big problem of the text. I think that if the text is necessary, then the audience then there's probably a problem in the performance that can't reach this feeling that we're trying to show. And it's lying in the text. The explanatory text is very problematic in my opinion because you try to give something to the audience that he doesn't need, and if he needs it, then there's a problem in the actual artwork. So.
Not so sure. I mean,
I get this all the time.
Because someone who's interested in a performance, let's say I stage managed for quite a while in theater, and when I watch theater, I not only watch the actors, but I always notice the things that go wrong with the light cue being a little too late or something going wrong, and I take pleasure in it because I know what's going on, and I know that whoever I go with has absolutely no clue that something is going wrong, and that's usually a good thing. But when it comes to perfectly done interactive piece or an improvisational piece, I think there is something lost if people don't know that it's improvisation. Mainly maybe they would appreciate it much more if they knew what goes into it. So I think there is that not necessarily done with the text saying this is an improvisational piece, which means they improvise, but to somehow communicate or show that it is not just rehearsed and always like this, but they're seeing actually something unique for that night.
I think revealing a technique is problematic. I think that revealing your technique is not
like a magician would.
Exactly, and we're allowed to lie. We are totally allowed to lie. We can say on stuff that are improvised that
but at the same time,
the other
you have this cliche of a laptop on stage, and people say, "Oh, he's just checking his email."
Yeah.
So then we can say, "Yeah, we're magicians," but they will say he's checking his email.
Yeah.
So how do we communicate with this audience
if
without
playing amazing music? Nobody will care.
What kind?
No, I do care. I totally not agree. They play awesome music, but I hate the fact that they have the laptop in front of them.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so
I'm a performer.
I
study.
Yeah, okay, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't make you. It's not.
I think
it cannot be your excuse.
Like doing that and insisting on sitting on stage.
Sorry?
Insisting on sitting on stage.
I mean, if you're in the back of a club and you're playing your music from a laptop,
but again, then you get the context.
I mean, there's no problem.
But that's okay. But again, the point is it becomes a
So
problem
that's
when
a
it's
huge topic.
People watch.
Yeah.
But if this is important to you, it's something you can build into the structure of your piece. If you think of conventional jazz, it often starts with, here's this melody that people know or that everybody's playing in unison, and then all of a sudden, it's the contrast of going into the improvisation. Or, if you're looking at Ornette Coleman and free jazz, you have all this craziness, and then it's those points of unity that come together, which give you that punctuation. And so it's that variation between control and focus that can happen with something that's very clearly sequenced, and then something that's more organic. And that's something that you can choose to reveal and engage your audience with, if that's a key expressive point.
So the key there is that first you set a pattern, an expectation for the audience, and then you purposefully deviate from that in a very obvious manner so that they must pick up on it.
Yeah, that's a very
good way of doing
And
it.
again, this is something that happens during the piece.
introducing
This
something.
is something that's not introduced with the text. It's something that's
Okay, but we are not supporting text, so you can move on.
Blow.
But we were just trying to make sure that how can you make people pick up that there is something extra going on there, just so that the effort doesn't go away and they are in tune with the today's way of performing, that new technologies are being part of these things, which they used to think that it was just like linear or scripted hardcore pieces, you know.
I don't think text is necessarily, I mean, text can very well be a part of
Text is evil.
Text can very well be a part of the whole work. I mean, I have
Definitely.
this Sono Botanics installation. Part of the work is this semi-scientific text about the science of solar mechanics.
But
Yeah,
it's a
okay,
genre.
then it's part of the thing.
It's almost a genre. Which is not a problem. I'm not saying this negatively.
But then the text has a value in and of itself,
An artistic
more
value.
than just being a description of something else. It has
But
so
at the
many
same
uses.
time, it describes what happens in
Oh,
what
that's
kind of
devilish.
Yeah.
what happens in the work.
Right. Well, what about the genre of live coding? You know, where you often start with silence with a blank screen while they're typing and you're seeing the code being typed, and then all of a sudden it comes to play, and then it's improvising with that. And you know that there's interaction going. It's a flip from, you know, the audience can see everything you're doing, and assuming they're making a leap that there's a connection, and there may or there may not be that, but there is. And, you know, but there the text is foregrounded.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've seen one guy doing this amazingly well, and it was a beautiful performance. It was a guy sitting on his computer with Super Collider, but he has those patches with pictures and GIFs and that kind of stuff. And it was one of the first actual live coding performances that I saw.
Okay,
it was
that's a good
actually
point.
a performance. It was
Yeah.
actually a guy sitting in front of his computer and making music, and it was theatrical. It had the more
Thingy, yeah.
more.
There you have an interesting point. What I usually lack in those performances is a visualization on a more abstract level of the system that is being created. I don't want to see just the low level code. I want to see at a higher level abstraction what's happening.
He used, I don't know, HTML or something. He had all kinds of stuff going on, and he used to play the images, and it was really nice.
But there are like different ways of doing these live code sessions. One of the things I've been involved in myself is live coding battles, where you have like teams, and we did stuff like quarterfinals and then the final, and then finally somebody wins the cake. And that in itself already displays, from when you see more performances, and if you see one live code performance and you don't know anything about code, it's like, okay, I have no idea what's going on. But if you see 4 or 5 after each other, you get to see, okay, that's that thing again.
It's like Mario.
And you have stuff like, indeed there is audience interaction, like we did stuff like, okay, when you hear the first sounds, you can clap, and when you hear something really cool, you can yell or whatever. And have that sort of crowd interaction. And then I've seen people really perform the hell out of their live code session by just using the built-in mic, standing up, screaming. There was one guy who was shaking the strings because there's some tilt sensors built into his MacBook. So he used that as a sensor. He was like, I don't know, it was really performing something there. So I think it can be done also in like these usually fairly short time spans. That
Yeah, I mean, I have this live code performance I did a bunch of times. Which I basically made it, someone asked me to do a live coding thing, and I was like, well, when does that actually make sense? So then I came up with the idea of just using, as a basic sound material, I used the internal microphone. So all the sound that I manipulate comes from the typing on the keyboard. And then I also have the laptop on my lap and access all the other senses, like the tilt sensor, the camera, and also the keyboard as an HID device. All these things, and then use these things, echo these things to manipulate the sound again. Like certain keys will then be connected to the filtering of the sound. So if I stop typing or type the same letter too often, it will just start like feedbacking, and it all becomes horrible. So I have to keep typing differently. No shortcuts. And at the same time, the screen is projected so people can read what I'm doing. And people have been really enjoying this performance. And it's also like, I can't play back the code and get the same result. It's really about the active live code and the side of it.
It sounds like you turned your laptop into an actual instrument that has rules, very specific rules that you have to
that's
play
what you always do
with
live coding. What I most like personally about live coding is that you see something which is quite rare. You see an artist really with nothing, a blank screen, and very limited time. And there's a certain intensity. And even though I've seen like live performance where somebody's just sitting and just typing, but the intensity of the time pressure, and he has to make stuff up. He has just, within now and 6 minutes, something interesting has to come out of these speakers, because otherwise, you have an audience that's watching, and most audiences where I performed weren't really friendly or anything. It was like, if it took longer than 20 seconds for you to get any sound, it was like, yeah, yawn. But that kind of intensity, even if visually it's just somebody watching the screen and typing code, can be, that sort of concentration, that intensity can be entertaining.
But then that is the performance and not the sound that they create.
No.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
you have the sound
Because
at the end of the 6 minutes and time's up, then you've just seen a guy coding for a while, and that was the show.
No.
But
I'm done.
on the one hand, the sounds could still be really good, really interesting, and you don't just see somebody coding, but you can witness the entire thought process of somebody. Because usually,
That's the question.
but that's the question.
That's the
Only if
question.
you understand what's written down.
No.
but
Because
you can detect hesitation. You can detect if somebody codes something and erases it. That tells you something, even if you don't know anything about code. If somebody,
I have a question. Would it be sort of the same effect if there was a writer writing on the spot? They have 6 minutes or whatever, and they have to come up with a very interesting story.
Yeah.
But the story could be shit, and you're just watching him struggling to write. Is this an interesting thing to me? I'm just asking. Like, where does it lie? It's a good question. Like, where
Depends if you write a good story.
in certain contexts, it could be really interesting. To
okay,
see.
it could be obviously, but it's also a bottleneck. Like for people. I mean, that's my main question.
Well,
I'm always questioning. Is it
It's
about
the same
sound?
thing, like to see someone who's really good at live code, it's wow.
Otherwise, when
At the
someone is
same
good at
time,
something, it's
You
always
have to
hard.
know. You have to be able to understand what that person is doing. Otherwise, if you don't have any idea of the code which is typed down, you won't be able to tell if he's good or not.
I'm not sure.
I'm
I'm not sure. I
pretty
think
sure.
Tess is right. You can see a feeling of a performer
Yeah, but
in,
if the
in
audio,
everything he does.
if the audio sounds crappy, but it's very hard to do in 6 minutes, we will be able to know that.
But that's not interesting live coding, I think.
Yeah. I mean, if the sound is crappy, then the sound is crappy.
Yeah, that's just as bad as if the laptop's turned around and it's still crappy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like somebody playing this huge instrument with like all sides going everywhere and 500 knobs that he has to control, and he doesn't make any sound. But
So-
the instrument looks really cool.
Would you then say that
That's not
the
interesting.
live coder is good if the sound is not crappy?
No, it's a combination about the sound and how it's being produced. But that's always
So
the
the
case.
best. So it's only like this. If it's it's at its best when the sound is good, but also
The
coming to
performance.
that part, sound was actually interesting to watch and actually try to understand. Yeah,
Hmm.
but there are occasions where the sound is crappy, but the trying to get there was somehow interesting. Or
It's true.
and if the sound is interesting, but the process till it got to that.
It would be disappointing though.
Yeah,
if-
it's
It
Yeah.
would be disappointing
Yeah.
if the process
The
was
sound
really
doesn't
interesting
cut out.
and the output was
And there's different forms of enjoying stuff. I've seen live code sessions where somebody was really struggling and was like, "You need to connect that one there." People from the audience yelling. And, while it wasn't a good performer, it was definitely entertaining.
Is it a spectacle? Was that the word?
Yeah, it was like that was like cabaret, or like that was just fun.
Which is good.
Cabaret coding.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a large part of people who code every day for a living, and they're a great audience for live coding. They get to see someone else coding on stage and producing music.
Sure.
They like that.
Hmm.
It's a very
And these
niche.
people
very
earn a
niche,
lot of
yeah.
money.
Yeah.
Just not live coding.
No, they're not live coding.
should be marketed
They-
towards them.
Yeah, that's.
I mean,
so
there
Market
I-
is in
I-
high tech.
I did one
places.
of the performances I did was at an open source conference.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean,
It's a good audience. Yeah.
there is this,
They
there's
loved it.
truth in it that live coding has this very, I mean, then it's got
No.
good craftsmanship to it, or what do you call it, it's expertise, and I like that part. But question before was.
I'm kind of wondering with more traditional forms of live electronics, where the electronics are being coded beforehand. I'm always wondering how much of the effort that's going into that is being perceived by an audience.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a very
Because
good
I sometimes have the feeling that since so many tools have been becoming available to a very general and the tools of making music have been democratized a lot in the past few years. And a lot of these programs have so much stuff already in them that you only have to put in 3 notes and it sounds amazing already. It's getting harder to communicate having coded everything yourself and having created an entire system that works and that's playable and that is interactive, and have an audience think like, wow, yeah.
Amazing.
That's,
Then
does it
code
matter?
an extra tool for that. Code an extra tool just for conveying that.
But how would you do that then?
yeah, I'm kind of wondering.
Well, presuming you work in Super Collider while you're live coding, or is
Well,
that what you do?
now we're not talking about live coding. We're talking about pre-programmed systems meant for a performance or for performing a composition or a
Oh.
piece. So how do you communicate? Well,
You're there to say importance, right?
yeah. Well, the
I know.
importance of all this work which you had to do beforehand for creating this piece or this performance, because I think it's very important.
I think John has something to say.
Why do you think
Yeah.
it's important?
Because if you prepare all this stuff beforehand, you can create something totally different than when you create something on the spot.
Well, then wouldn't that be apparent to the audience? That you've created different music? Isn't that why they're going to see it?
But how will they be able to see that if there's no comparison?
They'll hear it. They'll hear different music than they've heard elsewhere. Why would you
Yeah, that's true.
spend months programming something to make the same music? you
Yeah,
can
that's
make
true.
today?
That's a good
Yeah.
point. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is sort of like, I guess it's more, maybe that is more like in-crowd stuff that you sort of know. I've been saying like with, for instance, building systems for interactive installations. I go out of my way to create like genetic algorithms that evolve over time, blah, 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 blah. And what you finally end up with is something that starts more chaotic and ends up being less chaotic. Which is something you could do like, okay, randomness with, you start with random and you crossfade to something that is organized. Which is exactly the same, like sonically and in experience, it's exactly the same thing.
If you
So
want
it's
people to
basically,
have insight in your system, then give them insight into your system.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah,
Don't
but how?
make
let
it
them
a-
rely.
I mean, if you want the system to be art, you have to reveal the system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
exactly.
Okay, but how will you reveal the system?
yeah.
Which is the question.
That is the question of how do we communicate live electronics with the
Very good
audience?
question.
Well, the way I would do that is create a visualization toolkit for the system that I create.
A toolkit, a
Maybe you
presentation
should
A
toolkit.
make
presentation
two
toolkit,
versions.
yeah.
Sorry?
Yes, maybe you should just make 2 versions. One that has your genetic algorithm and one that does the crossfade.
What I was sort of trying to get into is the difference between faking it and actually building something that works. Because that's something I'm running into constantly as a creator of artworks and instruments. I personally, I love to get a system working the way it should. So I spend lots of hours trying to understand certain system and implementing it in a way that they actually
But
work the way
I
it should.
think that's also like with each exhibition that you work on this. You sort of have to sort of analyze what it's actually doing and then looking like looking at it and see, does this actually do what I, or is this actually interesting, and see if you can like tune the algorithm more to what you would like to see, or to make it more interesting. And that takes time. Like the first time it will be just getting it to work. The second time you understand the algorithm a bit better, and you know like which knobs to turn to make it more interesting for the audience to see. And the third or fourth time it will be great.
Yeah. I think right now I have the feeling I can program something that will work in such a way that the audience won't notice the difference between it just working the way it should and it being faked. And that's sort of the...
But what do you mean with fake?
It's basically half theater. Like instead of they won't know the difference if it was say a program piece or it was a written piece. Let's just put it that way. Like if it was
what's the difference between program piece and written
like
piece?
okay, for in this case, for example, genetic algorithms. The outcome of this genetic algorithms when you listen was just very random rhythmical stuff to very rhythmical, like not rhythmical, so rhythmical stuff. Yeah. So let's just put it that way.
Okay. Yeah.
And you can just compose this over time and then play a wave file, for example.
Oh,
for the audience, it won't be any different.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless there is some sort of revealing point for the interactions that they can
exactly.
connect to.
So that's the same question again.
The language itself has to become the art piece. So it's like the code itself has to be.
But I'm also sort of thinking it's something you might be able to build an audience that likes to
build an audience.
There is an audience. I mean, it's like the students of the HKU.
That's true. And
I mean, like you know, or in my coding, it's professional programmers. I mean, no, I'm not being facetious at all. I mean, if your focus is on like how cool the technology you're using is, then you need to approach audiences that are going to be interested in how cool your technology is. And if your focus is on how great your music is, then that's another story.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really exclude.
I mean, why is the genetic algorithm interesting?
It doesn't necessarily exclude, you just gain also an audience that you can show your code to.
Yeah, but that was a good question here.
In a way, you market it differently. There is this audience that will listen to your music and will not understand the word you're saying when you come to the specifics of the technology, but they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about, but your music is great and I'm a fan. And that there is this other group that will be like, that is such a great idea, how do you do it? And in a way, it will have to be the two different things, and you'll have to deal with, in a way, two separate things. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to deal with one, it's just dealing with
one or the other.
But specifically, like with genetic kind of stuff, what it creates is a sort of wonder. Like it was chaotic, and
but it's for you
somehow it morphs into something that is.
You can have.
What is your reason to use the genetic?
That's why
the reason why I'm using it is because it's a really interesting way of getting sort of logical results without having put the logic into the system yourself. So you're being surprised from what you're getting out of it.
It's a tool for you. It's not a tool for the audience. It's not something you would even need to reveal to the audience. I mean, it's for you to get certain results that you like.
Yeah.
But
the results are the experience that the audience gets.
Yeah, exactly.
But suppose you would want to show them, because it somehow is important to your piece, that evolution is central to it. You can understand evolution at very many different layers. So don't just give them one basic level of understanding that is at the gene level, and you see the genetic algorithm work. You can also see, this is one strand, and the results that come out of that are different. And then when they combine, and you show somehow the process of them combining, something different comes out.
But again, you show them the process.
Yes.
You mean visually then?
I think that's definitely the way to go, because audio is a one-dimensional signal that has no state in itself.
I don't think
very easy way of putting it.
An example of successful use of a genetic algorithm as the focal point of an artwork. There's a project called GenJam, which it allowed people to basically vote on which. So it's an online system for combining fragments of jazz melodies and things like this. And people can go on the system and kind of vote which combinations they like. So actually the crowd is sourced to evolve these melodies into something that maybe everybody likes. So their evolution actually plays a central role in the experience of the piece. And you know, like you asked the audience actually get to be like their fitness judge.
We were trying to do this, for example, in this but
The
communicating is hard.
results that I heard from that are mostly that the most dullest fragments come out in the end because that's what everybody likes.
Regresses back.
Yeah.
Because you go back to the lowest
Well,
denominator.
it depends on how many people you. So it's kind of,
Yeah, but my question is, is the result really important here, or is the process? I think it's the process
I think
that's
the process is
interesting.
the most interesting thing in that project. Yeah.
It's not so
It's an
much about,
engagement
oh,
in
what's
work.
going to come out. It's like, hey, how it's going to come
And the
out.
social engagement.
Right,
Yeah.
so engagement with
If the dullest bits come out, that's interesting in itself.
Yeah.
It leaves you wondering why.
Why the hell is this happening all the time?
I mean, in a way,
Yeah, but-
it's like simulation artwork, you know?
Yeah.
but in
Running
a
simulations
sense,
and seeing interesting results come out.
in a sense, Bernard and I did something similar, bar the fact that we didn't explain to people that they were in fact
Selective.
influencing what was
I
happening, and yeah, it's sort of. While they were influencing it, they didn't know it, and I think a part of the experience of that just got lost
Of
because
course.
they just, yeah, the time it took for the influence of them to have an effect on the system took too long, and yeah, I'm sure.
They couldn't see the consequences of their participation or being there or their involvement. Like in this case, you pick it and you know you picked it and you see the thing. In our case, we were actually picking it, but the result or the processing was not visible. So that was our learning point. But again, it was only an audio thingy, except for the resultant glimpse. So the question again, where you were laughing at it, how do you communicate such things?
Yeah, what,
The processes.
you were kind of gung-ho about disproving me that visuals aren't the way to go to communicate
No,
something.
no. But I think that there is adding visuals is tricky.
Huh?
Adding visuals is very tricky, and well, a lot of times I feel that it takes my attention away from the important parts, which are.
But it does take attention away.
Yeah,
I think
of course.
most artists use it as because they don't have
But
to
it
focus
shouldn't
on the
take the
performance.
attention away. It should
Add
be,
something to it.
It
Yeah.
should be balanced
Yeah.
with a whole. That's I'm not doing, but no, I was just thinking that it's extremely tricky, and explaining genetic tree thingy with visuals.
I think it's trickier to do with audio.
I think so.
Of course, what?
Yes.
You need
Yeah.
time. A
I
lot
think
of
it's
time.
trickier to hear evolution than to
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. If you want to show it without music, go ahead. If you have the music already, adding visuals to it in order to explain it.
And without making it
tricky.
look like it's just
Without-
a
exactly,
manual.
without-
Yeah, making it
without
problem is
using
The
you-
Beethoven is a great example of genetic evolution. You know, if you think the Fifth Symphony starts off with this very small one, and then it turns into that. I mean, there's examples of that, but again, if you aren't accustomed to hearing at that level, you're not going to necessarily perceive it that way.
No.
Yeah.
So minimalism is, in that sense, really good. You just start out with something quite simple and make small mutations to it, and it slowly evolves. And that actually seems to map quite well to something that is an installation that slowly evolves. So in that sense, it does work, but still, visuals.
No, I'm not against visuals. It's just that it's tricky.
Here's a thought, though. I've seen many different fields of research where it appears that ideas stick better and are better fundamentally understood when they come to you in different ways, in different shapes, in different forms. So audio and visuals, they don't have to take attention away from each other, though your attention will drift from one to the other over time.
Yeah.
But they can reinforce each other from different perspectives. So I definitely wouldn't rule it out as a value asset.
Yeah, but then the explanation, in that sense, would become part of the work, and not be like you
Yes.
can either have like the work and the
It has to
explanation as
become
a
one.
sort of separate thing, or you can have like the explanation be part of.
She just explained that actually, right? With a, or not?
Yeah, but it
Not really.
but
the work you had, the text was part of the work, right?
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But that's like a conscious artistic choice to do that. And is that suitable for each work? I mean, here it was sort of like tacky, right?
Then again,
Like,
you have a problem with the artist though. If it's not the conscious decision,
Well, I mean,
and every part of your work is part of one work.
yeah, I'm kind of wondering, like, why does everything need to be so explained? And why wouldn't it be nice to have just words that are there, and if you don't like it, well, fuck it. Just
Well, we've been doing that
it's sort of like the
I
warm,
would say
About
so.
100 years.
it's sort of like
more or less.
the warm kind of way, like, okay,
The history of art.
Yeah.
Welcome to Art
I guess
101.
the important thing is like that if you give the audience an introduction, it has to be good and appropriate. I mean, I went to a kind of performance installation piece in Montreal at some point, and it was on a stage, but the audience would go on stage, and there was one like performer in a special suit, and the whole scenery was very like it was clearly like a different space, like not your everyday like space. And before I went in, I asked like, well, what's going on? And then I got an explanation. Well, there's an actor and you can interact with him. I was like, well, that's not here. I want to get like a story to be introduced to this other world I'm going to step into. And then I know like what my role is in this other world, and I can act accordingly. But there was like no introduction as such. So you're just your everyday person there. And you're like, I don't know what I'm doing here.
So you think it's
I don't know what
necessary?
this world is.
So you need to have a goal, or you need to have a
Well, I guess
goal.
in this piece it was like there was no context given for like what this space was, and if you are like letting like audience members going into a very specifically designed space that clearly portrays like not like our world, then you should introduce the person like what they are, what the setting is.
but how did you experience the place?
When you get
When you
inside
got
the
it.
space, don't you?
It was not engaging because
Yeah.
it was like, yeah.
You need to at least consciously
Do
design
you
for
think
the
that it would
transition between
Yeah.
I'm in the normal world and I'm going to the other world.
Do you
is
think that it would
completely
be
new.
more engaging if you would be
Oh.
introduced to it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
Because maybe
If I
it was
know,
just
like,
not
what role I
engaging,
have
then
to
it
act,
doesn't matter what comes
Yeah.
before. Hmm? What?
If I know what role I have in the space,
Yeah.
then I can do something with that.
Yeah, but he asked, do you think if you had this explanation before for this particular piece, would it be engaging then, or was the piece just not
Because that's what I'm
engaging?
saying. If the piece is not engaging, then it
Well-
doesn't matter what you're given before.
Well, I guess if they had thought about that, they would have put in more,
Okay.
like, more story into the piece.
Yeah, but
Anyways.
don't you think the piece, a piece can be engaging on itself without the backstory? Or do you think
it
that's
depends on the
impossible?
piece, like, it depends
Okay.
on the piece, like, what you do with it.
I'm just thinking about
But
maybe
if there's no context and just technology, then,
it might be.
or
Yeah.
We might need a little break, maybe.
I got one question,
Yeah.
but maybe we can
After
continue
that,
after
maybe.
the break. How many, and I assume there's a fair amount of you that actually do these installations. I'll just go with yes. Do you prototype your installations? Do you test it on people and then go back and say, well, this didn't work, this didn't come across, this failed completely, we need to do it completely differently? Because I
Yeah.
get the idea that that doesn't happen all that much. But
That's-
if so, how? And how does that
That's-
work?
Depending on the
See this
space.
spot and use this as the
Starting point.
Yeah.
Or after a
Yes.
break? Alright.
Awesome.
I guess that it's connected to maybe
Drinks,
instead of
bathroom,
live version.
air,
Yeah,